All right, let's talk about how I made some rusty looking beams because I have Spider-Man and a lot of you guys have different climbing action figures, superheroes and such. So, steel beams are always something you can use, whether you're doing a warehouse scene or you've got some fight scene with the figures high over a city or something. Beams are just one of those things that it's always nice to have to fill out a scene. And here I'm going to share with you how I painted these old gray resin prints into something that looks rusty and a little bit more colorful and attractive. So once I took the beams, I washed them, cured them, and everything. I did a base coat with a rattle can Rust-Oleum rust brown on there. Once that dried, we're going to add the texture. And the texture here is made up of Mod Podge, matte Mod Podge, and cinnamon. Yep, hard to believe, but cinnamon. So I used to buy AK Terrain's corrosion effect, and it was a paste, a granulated paste that was the color of, rust. And once it dried, it left a texture behind that you could paint over or pigment over or just leave it like it was, out of the container. But it got to be pricey, and I liked the corrosion effect, but if you can make something like this yourself, it's always, well, it's not always better, but it's usually a better option to be able to see if you can find a way to replicate it and make it yourself. And so that being said, I didn't come up with this formula or this idea. It was suggested to me by somebody else in the toy photography community who builds dioramas. And that's one of the great things about the toy photography community. If you throw something out there, people are going to, have an answer or maybe a hack on how to do it. And one day I threw out there the fact that I was tired of buying this corrosion rust effect, and somebody threw this idea out there that they had used in their own dioramas, and I thought, well, that sounds so odd, but so believable, and I could see how it would work. Cinnamon. So here we are. Now, make sure you get organic cinnamon when you do this. No, you don't need organic cinnamon. It's just what I have. So you get a consistency mixed up in the cup that you like. The trick here is you're not going to paint this on. You're going to dab it, stipple it, and spread it out, but not in back and forth brush strokes. It's all in a stippling motion. And the reason for this really is two reasons. We don't want streaks, long streaks, as this dries. You don't want it to dry in long streaks because that's not how rust is. It's cakey, it's matted down, it's flaky, but it's not streaky. So we want to apply it in a stippling motion. Now you might wonder why I'm doing the bottom. And the reason is because this texture is not just good for rust, but it's a good base coat for any type of textured surface that you want. Here I'm going to use it as concrete, a concrete base. I'm going to paint over it a gray, and it's going to, look like concrete. On top, I'm going to paint over it with pigments, and it's going to look like pitted, rust. And so it's a pretty versatile way to create, underlying textures that you paint over, or, as in this case here, rust. And so now it goes on wet looking, and as the Mod Podge dries, all that's left behind really is the texture, because the Mod Podge dries invisible or clear. And so if you wanted to at this point, you could add a color to the Mod Podge paint mixture, but I find it's better to mix it and then, just let the cinnamon color show through and put it on what you want, and then paint over it on top. Once it's on top, then go ahead and add your paints to the surface afterward. And how thick you put it on or how thin you put it on, spread out or packed down is entirely up to you. For me, I know what looks good and I kind of go through it and I know, what the end result is going to be. And I've got a process that I know works for me. And what I don't recommend though, is that you glob this on there in thick blobs and let it set, because that's not how rust looks. So try to keep the surface kind of like you see here once this is dry, in a way that's going to not be, too large or out of scale or anything like that. And so now that it's dried, you see how it doesn't look wet anymore. All that's left behind is the texture of the cinnamon itself, and the Mod Podge has dried clear and invisible. Ooh. Let's put out some gray paint. And it's a little bit stringy in there. Let me wipe that up. Apple barrel. Weird. Let's add a drop of some kind of yellow in here. Why not? It's probably not even going to do anything, but let's put it in there because in my mind it does something. Look at that little bit. What is that little bit of yellow going to do? Nothing. But it's there. Sometimes in my mind I'm thinking of something and it just isn't. It doesn't translate. But anyway, we'll mix this up. So the key here is brush sizes. We want to make sure that we've got a couple different brush sizes to work with. The largest brush, which is going to give us the maximum amount of surface cover in a single stroke, and then we want some smaller sizes, and I'll show you why later. But for this first part, we're just going to paint the concrete base of the beams. We're just going to paint it a simple gray. With a dot of yellow. So just look at that. Yellow did nothing. But hey, it's okay because we're going to stain these with pigments anyway. And then we'll add some washes to the... Don't do it. Do not put that white in there. See? He listened. We're going to add some stains and stuff at the end. So it's good just to put a simple base coat of gray down on here and don't get too carried away with paint color. Get your base idea of what you want, and then you can add washes to that. So what I want to show you is when you put this gray on, look how awesome the cinnamon texture shows through the paint. It gives you a really nice looking texture. And another thing it does is it makes the whole room smell good. I mean, this is fantastic. But it really does make the room smell good because it is still fragrant. Though it's mixed in with Mod Podge, it is releasing its fragrance into the air. Probably, and even after you seal it with the Mod Podge aerosol, it still does smell a bit like cinnamon. So it's kind of neat. Alternatively, you can use stuff like, cayenne pepper, I guess, or other granulated things. Pre-mixed grout would work also. If you wanted something that didn't have, don't use cayenne pepper. I will say that because you're going to burn yourself. But look at that texture in there. It's a great base, a great way to start off with some concrete. So, and back to the pre-mixed grout and stuff like that, you can buy little $5 pint sizes of pre-mixed grout that you can put on there too, and then it'll dry and just paint over that. It's a textured sort of paste also, and so it's like a sheetrock mud, but with little granules of magical stuff in there. But here we'll just get this gray paint laid down at a pretty even coat, and then once we get the gray down, then it's time for the magic of the powdery pigments. The longest part of doing this is just letting the stuff dry. The process is so quick. Once everything is dried, first your your spray paint has to dry, then your Mod Podge cinnamon mixture that you put on has to dry, then your paint has to dry. But that's the struggle. So another thing here to keep in mind, if you wanted at this point, you don't even have to go to add pigments. I mean, at this point, you've got the beams that are textured and a rust color. You could just go ahead and stain the concrete and sort of stipple some washes on there and make it look a little more yellow and white and different, stained concrete colors. But the textures and the color of the beam is okay. I mean, if you wanted to stop here, you could, but I don't. This is important. After this paint dries and these pieces are all thoroughly dried, you need to spray this or cover it with Mod Podge. I prefer the Mod Podge aerosol because it dries quickly and it just goes on quickly, and there's no brush strokes or anything like that, and it doesn't. I mean, see, look, once I spray it, you can drag your hand over it and it doesn't come up on your fingers. It's really necessary for that, but more importantly, because we're going to be using alcohol washes for laying down the pigments. And if you were just to use, not to spray seal this, and you would go to spray alcohol on here and start adding pigments and isopropyl alcohol on here, you're going to wear the apple barrel paint away pretty quickly. And you're also going to sort of rehydrate or reinvigorate or reactivate the Mod Podge, and it's going to get a little like slippery, and it's just seal it, preferably with an aerosol. And then once you seal it and you start using your isopropyl alcohols on here, don't overhandle the pieces, because you will still begin to damage the finish until the alcohol is thoroughly dried. And you'll see as I go through here and I do this, I do pieces at a time, because if you spray with alcohol and then you handle it, then it's just, you're going to mess the surface of this up. So, and even more so without a spray sealer on there. Going to get a few varying size brushes here because we need to start thinking like in terms of layers. A wider, darker layer, a next narrower, lighter layer, and then a next even narrower or finer brush, lighter layer on top of that. We're working from darks to lights on this in smaller brush, starting out with the larger brush size and working our way down to what we think is the smaller brush size. The smallest brush size that we'll need, and I'll have 3 brushes out here is what I'll end up using. What I want to do first is drag my brush across that spot on the cardboard. That's key before beginning any project. No, I'm just playing. So sometimes I do the videos and I think I'm going to just use the audio from the GoPro, but then I say dumb stuff, and so I end up scrapping that audio, but my hand gestures match the old audio while I'm doing the new voiceover, so whatever. If you're not funny, just keep talking. So the first part I want to tackle here is the base of this. We want to darken this base up a little bit. Just, you can darken it with, browns or blacks or a combination of all of, those yellows, dingy yellows and lighter rust orangish yellows. I'm just going to start off with a basic light black and just sort of dingy it up real quick. And I'm going to do this first at the very base where the I-beams meet the concrete. And you're going to see that as this process goes on, I'll lay brown and then some lighter browns and some oranges even over the area that I'm laying the black. And you might think it looks like counterproductive where you're just covering up the color that you just put there. But I'm not, because you'll see that all these little colors and tones show through because I don't completely cover them up. It's like if you took a fat Sharpie and you drew a line, and then you took a narrower Sharpie and drew a line inside that line of another color, you can still see, you know, both colors there. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but that's what I'm saying. So let's get some alcohol sprayed onto these black pigments. Notice here too that I'm really close with the spray bottle, and then I started out really far away. Really far away gives a light mist, and it sort of sets the pigments in place. And then as I get really close and I just barely squeeze the trigger, I let drops out of alcohol, and that moves the pigment around and gives it sort of, lets gravity take some of it down the sides of the concrete bases. And so there's a technique in there where, like I say, it's like if you ever airbrush, the closer you are, the more you pull the trigger, things like that. Hand motion is kind of important here. So now that I've got a good bit of black around the base where the beams meet the concrete, we're going to go ahead and just really lightly dust some black on here. Really lightly, and just kind of look at how that texture grabs all that pigment though, man. It's really cool. It's just cinnamon. Who would have thought? I never used so much cinnamon in my life until I started crafting. And you might think, oh, you know, this could look a little dark on that gray right now, but the more alcohol you put on there, the lighter it washes down to. And then you can add washes back at the end with a sponge to stipple back in some of the original gray color to create more patterned bits of different color to help, you know, keep the layers looking random and realistic. The heat gun helps me dry the alcohol quickly, because even though alcohol does dry quick, it stops the spread of the alcohol and lets me keep it all under control. Look at this. Just some resin, some paint, some cinnamon, and some Mod Podge, man. Who doesn't love this stuff, man? This is fun stuff. So what I'm searching for now is the next lightest, most visible brown that I want to use. I don't want to go right from the dark to a vibrant orange, newer rust. I want to go in there with different shades and work my way up to the lightest. And so that's what I'm doing here as I fumble around. And actually, I'm going to spray a little alcohol into this palette. And the reason is because I'm going to go to a smaller brush right here. And I want to, in a different method than brushing it on and then spraying with alcohol, I want to dip the brush in the alcohol and sort of clump the next color on around the base. Because if you can sort of picture these old concrete bases with these steel beams in them, and the rust sort of forms around the bottom and the base where the concrete and the steel meet, and over time it sort of drips down and there's discoloration and staining on the concrete. That's what I'm trying to do right here. And so we need a smaller brush to do that. We started with a little bit wider brush. Now we're going down to a little bit narrower brush. And I'm just adding this color in. You know, I'm not totally covering up the black. I'm adding it in on top, but a little more close to where the base of the beam and the concrete come together. All right, now let's take out another color here. It's probably way more than I need, but hey, it's only money, right? So once we get all that down like I like on the base of the beams, I'm going to go back through here, and all I want to do on these beams here is I just want to lightly break up the color of the brown. Remember, at this point on these cross beams here, there's only spray paint brown and the color of the cinnamon. I want to break that up just a little bit by adding another brown over that. And you can see here, that's all this is. It's just the spray paint and the cinnamon, which looks fine. But see, now I added some brown to the other side and sprayed it with alcohol. It just gives the eye something more to grab to, and it doesn't look so, so one-colored. And so that's what we're doing here, is just dragging some heavier and lighter in other areas, and you don't have to cover the whole piece if you don't want to, but spray it, let it sit down and dry, and repeat it with the other pieces. Seldom is there just one colored something, like these beams. They have rust and browns and oranges, and even in the browns there's like a sub of brown, subcolors of brown. So and like, look inside here, I've got the browns and I've got the oranges sort of faded out, and looks really soft and blended really nicely. It's just all about the hand motions and the way that you add the alcohol, and taking your time with different brush sizes and things like that. Let's take a new color out here, dip it in a little bit of alcohol. I'm trying to scoop some of that back up in the bottle because I put too much out the first time. I do have the soft chalk pastels that I grind up and use in place of the Vallejos, but I do have Vallejos also, and I probably will continue to have them until those bottles are empty. But the soft chalk pastels are a nice way to do the same thing a little less expensively. And you're not as concerned about wasting the soft chalk pastels as you are the Vallejos, because the soft chalk pastels are about $10 a box, and you get every color you want. So let's get another color out here, and a little bit less. There we go. Same thing. I'm going to drag a little bit of that in there. And this is a little bit lighter than the original brown. And this is just going to give your eye another layer of color to be dazzled by. And when you're taking photos with this stuff, all these little subtle layers and different color changes and little blends really, really help the photograph come alive. And so I try to create as many layers as I can in making this rust and painting in general. Having that alcohol in a spray bottle is such a nice way to apply it. Look at that. Good thing I have that mat down too, or I'd be ruining the surface of that desk, right? I don't even know why I have the mat there anymore. I don't know. Here we are, adding some more colors. You'll notice I'll dip the brush in the alcohol, and then I'll sort of get some alcohol, enough alcohol on there to get this stuff really watery and runny, and then let gravity bring it down, and I'll feather and blend it out so that there's no real hard edges to look unreal. Because your eye will go right to the part that doesn't look right. You'll be like, what is that? Looks weird. The edge of that color going into the other color it doesn't look real. But so you got to blend this stuff, and alcohol is a great way to do that. And you can continue to blend the colors and move the pigments around with alcohol all the way up until you let them dry and you spray them with an aerosol Mod Podge or sealer or paint on a Mod Podge. I don't recommend that once these dry you paint Mod Podge on there to seal these, because Mod Podge it's like painting a glue over the top, and it can disturb the pigments and sort of make them a runny, muddy color, not like you intended. So the Mod Podge aerosol is probably the best way to permanently set these pigments on the models. And It's the only thing that I use to set them on there. Good old heat gun on there. That heat gun's been with me for a long time. I've dropped it and broke it and opened it and fixed it, and it just won't quit. See how we got those nice runs and those nice, real subtle oranges going down the side there. I love that stuff, man. Same thing here. And then once you go to seal this with the Mod Podge aerosol, it's going to tame a bit of the orange and the bright colors down a bit. It's going to, sort of knock them back a little bit so they don't look so wild. Same thing here. I'm going to finish up with my last color, my lightest orange, which represents sort of a newer rust color. And I'm going to dip the tip of the brush there in some alcohol, and we're going to add this really sparingly because this color here is like really vibrant. And we have a smaller, even, finer brush here. What's he saying? See, we'll put this in little areas right up here in the corners, right on the very, corners of the beam and on the concrete. The goal of this brush here is just to really focus little spots of adding this orange really precisely and not covering large areas with it, because this will make your rust look like, what in the heck is so bright? Because it's a bright orange, and it takes a lot of taming it down to create the right sort of look to it. It's like white. When you add white onto something dark, a little bit goes a total long way. We'll spray this with a little alcohol, and we'll hit it with the heat gun. Make sure that it's all blended well. Make sure the alcohol has softened it up a bit and sort of feathered it out. And then once I get a look that I like with that, then we'll seal those up. We'll do the same thing on the next piece, just real sparingly. It's totally up to you. You're playing the role of time, and you're playing the role of creator right here. How this rests is entirely up to you. I can only offer suggestions. But I can't wait to get some photographs done with these, and I've had some other beams that I've used, like with Popeye and like railroad track beams and stuff for, mine carts and things, but I didn't have any beams like this with the bases and like structural support beams that are already tied into concrete and stuff. And I see a lot of this stuff in my day-to-day job. I deliver fuel, and so I'm at refineries and I'm at gas stations and I'm at places that have lots of industrial piping and beams and things like that. And so I see a lot of this stuff in my day-to-day job, and this is one of those things I had wanted to create a while back, and I forgot. It's with so many of the things that I want to create, I forget. But I was reminded of it the other day when I was going to photograph this ugly Mezco Spider-Man that I got. And I realized, I don't really have anything for him to climb on. And Spider-Man requires a certain kind of prop to photograph with, because, just because he flies through the air and he lands on things and he sticks to walls, and, you just need a certain kind of prop for him. And so we're going to blend this out a little bit more. It's a little bit hard-edged and clumpy, so I'm just going to add some alcohol on there and feather it out and water it down just a little bit more until I get the right blend that I like. And this is a good time, too, to point out, if you're watching this on YouTube and you're not a Patreon member, check out my Patreon. I have tutorials like this that come up first on Patreon. you'll get files like this. These beams, if you do 3D printing, these beams are a free file that I upload to my Patreon members. I have lots of 3D printable files on my Patreon. I have tutorials on how to rust just like this, on how to 3D print and things like that. And so check out my Patreon. It's cheap, $10 a month. You could dip in for the month, get all my stuff, and dip out. It's all good, as long as you show up. But shout out to my Patreon members too. I appreciate everybody who supports me through Patreon. Fine folks. And then check me out on Instagram, insightful_imagery. The links will be in the bio, or the links will be in the description of this video. If you want to buy these files, then you can do that on my Etsy or my website, insightfulimagery.com. You can visit that website also to check out some really cool toy photography and other props and 3D prints. And if you haven't done so, please subscribe to this channel also. I appreciate everybody who watches and interacts with me. Take care.